What if I told you that a single flower once cost more than a house? Not gold, not diamonds. A flower. It sounds impossible, but in the 1600s, this actually happened. In the Netherlands, during one of the richest periods in its history, people became obsessed with something unexpected: tulips. But tulips weren't originally from Europe. They were brought from the Ottoman Empire, carried by diplomats and traders who were fascinated by their beauty. At first, they were simply admired, elegant, exotic, different from anything Europe had ever seen. But in the Netherlands, something changed. This was the Dutch Golden Age. Trade routes stretched across the world. Ships returned with spices, silk, and unimaginable wealth. Amsterdam had become one of the most powerful financial centers on earth. And with wealth came a new desire, not just to be rich, but to look rich. Tulips became the perfect symbol. They were rare, difficult to grow, and visually stunning, especially the most unusual ones. Some tulips had streaks of color, almost like flames painted across their petals. These patterns were caused by a virus, but at the time, people didn't know that. All they knew was this: the rarer the tulip, the more valuable it became. Owning one wasn't just decoration, it was a statement, a way to show status, power, and taste. At first, only wealthy collectors and merchants bought them. But then something changed. People realized they could make money from tulips, and that's when everything began to spiral. Prices started rising slowly, then faster again. By the mid 1630s, the tulip market was exploding. Some bulbs were being sold for more than 10 times a skilled worker's yearly income. One famous tulip bulb could cost between 3,000 and 4,000 guilders. At the time, the average worker earned about 300 guilders a year. Think about that. One flower could equal years, even decades, of work. But here's where the story becomes truly strange. People stopped buying tulips to grow them. They started buying them to sell them. And eventually, they stopped even buying the tulips themselves. Instead, they traded contracts, promises, agreements to buy tulips in the future. This created something entirely new, a market where nothing physical was actually exchanged. The Dutch even had a name for it: wind trade, because they were trading air. These contracts were often made months before the tulips even existed in the ground, and yet they were being bought and sold like real assets. But it didn't stop there. These deals weren't happening in banks or official exchanges. They were happening in taverns, crowded, noisy rooms filled with merchants, traders, and speculators. People drank together, negotiated, signed contracts, and paid small fees just to participate. No one was thinking about the flower anymore. They were thinking about profit. The goal wasn't to own a tulip, it was to sell the contract to someone else for a higher price. And as long as prices kept rising, it worked. By late 1636, the system was completely overheated. Even the most common tulips were being sold for extraordinary amounts. Contracts changed hands multiple times a day. People who had never traded anything before were suddenly participating. Everyone believed the same thing: prices would keep going up. There would always be another buyer, someone willing to pay more, but that belief was the only thing holding the system together. Then came February 1637. At what should have been a normal auction, something unexpected happened. There were no buyers. The seller lowered the price. Still no buyers. Lower again. Nothing. And in that moment, everything changed. Confidence disappeared. And without confidence, the entire system collapsed. Prices didn't slowly decline. They collapsed almost instantly. Contracts that were worth fortunes one day became worthless the next. Panic spread quickly. People rushed to sell, but there was no one left to buy. And then another truth became clear: most of these contracts weren't legally enforceable. which meant people could simply walk away, and many did. The government stepped in, but instead of enforcing the contracts, they allowed them to be canceled for a small fee. The system didn't crash like a typical financial crisis. It dissolved. Most deals were never completed. Most money never changed hands. And surprisingly, the Dutch economy itself didn't collapse. There was no massive depression, no widespread destruction. Very few people were actually ruined, because the entire system had been built not on real exchange, but on expectation, on belief, on the idea that someone else would always pay more. Some economists later argued that the price increases weren't entirely irrational. Tulips were new, rare, and difficult to reproduce. Others pointed out that changes in contract rules may have reduced risk for buyers, making speculation more attractive. But in the end, the deeper explanation is simpler. People weren't buying tulips. They were buying the idea of profit. And when enough people believe that prices will keep rising, prices stop reflecting reality. Tulip Mania wasn't really about flowers. It was about human behavior, the desire to get rich quickly, the fear of missing out, and the belief that this time it's different, because in the end, people didn't fall in love with tulips. They fell in love with the price.